And I remember Earl Hebner, he got tears in his eyes, like heavy tears, and he swore to me, he goes, it'll never happen. I would never, ever do it. I swear to God, I swear on my kids. And, you know, we went through this whole thing, and I remember I went away that night. That was in Detroit, the night before Montreal, and I remember thought, well, thank God, I just hope that Earl is the referee tomorrow, because I know I got somebody that's so much, well, not, the way he sounded to me, that there was just no way they could ever force him into that, which was maybe my only mistake that weekend. But, you know, they grabbed Earl just before he went through the curtain, and surrounded him like a bunch of gangsters, Vince McMahon, Triple H, Shawn, and I don't know who else, and said, this is what's going down, and this is what you're going to do, and you're going to do it whether you like it. And if you're mic'd, he's on a microphone, an earpiece in his ear, anything he says or does that tips me off, and he's going to lose his job. And so they sent him out there with, you know, and poor Earl, I've been pretty mad at him for the first couple of months or weeks of that time period, but I've always understood that he got a shitty deal. He got put in a lousy position, and he had to compromise either me or his family, and I don't blame him for doing what he did. And I've never had much hard feelings towards Earl for that. But in saying all that, and I know everyone knows the story about the Screwjob pretty well from the documentary and all that. I remember after the whole Screwjob was over, smashing a bunch of TV monitors on the floor and taking these the headsets that were, I found out later that they were worth $100,000 a piece, and I think I threw 3 out into the crowd. And when I came back through the curtain, or towards the dressing room, the first door I actually walked up to was Vince's, and I think you can see a lot of that in the documentary. And I gave it a good shoulder I gave my shoulder into the steel cement case door, and I realized right away that I could break on my shoulder on that door for the next 20 years and I wouldn't break in that dressing room. He was locked in there. And so then I was very angry at that time. I was about ready to kill somebody, and as soon as I realized I couldn't get in the door, I just calmed right down. I was so calm from that point on. It just right to the bottom, like I was walked to the dressing room like I did every other night. It was like nothing I could do about it anymore. The show's over. The cameras are off. The wrestlers, most of them are gone. And I went to the dressing room, and if you recall from the documentary, I immediately stumbled upon Shawn. But there's always been a strange little thing about that night. Is I remember, if you watch, I'm walking down the hall, and my bag for some reason is on the floor in the hallway with all my stuff in it. And so I remember picking my bag up and having to bring it in the dressing room, which just doesn't mean anything, but I just always wondered who took my bag out. I don't know if it was Shawn or who, but they threw all my stuff out of the room that day. And I remember when I went in the dressing room, that's where you got Shawn swearing to God that he never knew anything about it. And I knew Shawn had everything to do with it, but I just didn't know 100%. I was like 99.9% sure that Shawn had a hand in that, but I didn't know for sure. So I remember thinking, I'm not going to react to it because maybe he's innocent, and I don't want to react on something that turns out it's false. So I kind of gave Shawn a pass till I knew more. I even let him kind of go that day. I calmed right down. I didn't want any confrontations or physicalities with anybody. I was just crushed. I was really hurt and devastated by what happened and humiliated. And you know, I remember sending the documentary crew out because I was almost annoyed with them because they didn't understand what was happening. And I just remember when I went to the shower, I walked to the shower and was taking a shower, and Davey Boy Smith and Rick Rude suddenly appear in the shower, peeking in, and it's like they were like excited like little kids, and they're going, Rick Rude is telling me, Vince McMahon's in the dressing room, he's waiting for you. And I told him, I said, you tell Vince McMahon just to get the hell out of here, because if it's not safe for him right now, and I'm just asking you to tell him to get out and leave me alone, because if he's out there when I come out, I'm gonna punch him out. I don't know why I used the word punch him out, but I did. That was the term I used. I'm gonna punch him out. And so Rick Rude and Davey, I remember they're so excited. They were like almost giddy with excitement, and they ran back. They came back about 20 seconds later and said, "He's not going to go, he's waiting, he's going to stay," and all that. They knew something was going to happen. I told them again, I said, "Please just tell Vince, do everybody a favor and just get out of here. I don't want any problems, and it's going to be a problem if I come out and he's there." And they came back and said, "No, he's staying." So I knew kind of the shit was on now. And it's funny because Davey used to always steal my towel in those days. He was always on just the match before me. He always forgot his towel. In fact, Davey always forgot shampoo, soap, towels, everything. And he told me, when I came out of the shower, I'm sopping wet and I got no towel. And I come down this little hallway and I got to walk right past Vince McMahon, naked. And I remember when I was mad enough too. I remember walking by him, and I wasn't much further away than me and John are, and I remember thinking, I had to just take him out right now. But I just always made me almost laugh at the time, because I thought, you just can't beat Vince McMahon up naked. It would just be a kind of a weird vision. I don't know. It's like, just didn't seem like the courageous thing to do or the right thing to do. So I remember I was really mad, but I remember I walked past him naked and I had to pick a towel up off the dressing room floor. And I remember I sat across from Vince, and it wasn't really a very big dressing room. And I remember I put the towel across my legs and started to get dressed. And me and Vince had an exchange of words. I remember him telling me that what I did to him, what he did to me, didn't hurt me. That's what he said. Wouldn't affect me. And I cussed him out. I really lost it. I gave him a really stern dressing down. I remember even when I was dressing him, and everything I said, I told him all the lies that he told me. That's the thing that he said to me. Now I'm just remembering. He said, I've never lied to anybody except for this is the first time I ever had to lie to one of my wrestlers, which I proceeded with, "You're a lying piece of shit." And I named off, like in the next 30 seconds, I named off maybe 30 lies he told me in the last 2 months, and just rattled them off like a statistician, just one after another. And then there was this, and I remember Davey was like, he wanted me to, Davey was like, he wanted me to get him for everybody kind of thing. And I think Davey maybe is one that kind of lit the fire in me a little bit. But I really dressed Vince down, and I remember I ended one of my little short sentences with him. "If you're still standing here when I get dressed, I'm going to knock you out." And I remember Vince didn't move, and I put my pants on, and I put my socks on, obviously put my underwear on. But anyway, so I got dressed real slowly. I remember tying my shoe, one shoe, and then I remember it was like tying my shoelace on my other shoe, and I thought, there's nothing else to tie or put on. It's time to. And I didn't really, I don't know if everybody think I'm just some kind of hot-headed guy that just punches out everybody that doesn't see things my way. But I was not like that. I really didn't want any of this to happen. I was just trying to. I realized, and I think that Vince McMahon, he was trying to save face in front of all the wrestlers, because there was a real mutiny or almost a full-scale riot in the dressing room that night from the other wrestlers that were upset about what happened, and including Undertaker. And so Vince was trying to save face, and the only way he could really save face was to come in there and take me on in front of everybody and show everybody that he was, I don't know what he was trying to show everybody, but he was trying to prove something. And so I remember that day when I got dressed and I tied my shoelace and I stood up. And I remember like looking at him and I was like, okay, I guess we're going to do this. Seems kind of childish, two grown men fighting about something, pretend. But there was a lot going through my mind in those few seconds. And my first initial thing I did was I picked my knee brace up off my wrestling bag, and I had this vision of hacking him with my, just beating him to a pulp with my knee brace. And then I kind of thought about that like I did when I was naked, like wrestling him naked. So I took it and very casually threw it back on my bag, and I said, I don't need this. And we kind of walked right towards each other like a pro wrestling match. And we actually locked up. We tied up just like a pro wrestling match, which was quite funny to me So I remember I had my left hand on Vince's padded shoulder. And then I realized that sort of what this was all about was that Vince and me were going to get into a little scuffle, and just at the right time, maybe as I was going to be going for the big punch, everybody would sort of jump on top and pull us apart, and I'd never even get my first punch in. Like, it was just everybody's getting ready to pounce. Even, I'll give you the scenario. It was Owen, Jim Neidhart, Davey Boy, Rick Rude, and then to my right was Shawn, or I think Undertaker. And then further past him was Shawn Michaels, who cried with his hand in his hands, blubbering, like bawling his eyes out like a little girl. Just bawling his eyes out. And I stood up, and like I said, we tied up. And I knew that everybody, including Owen and Davey, were all going to jump on and pull us apart. And I was never going to get one. I don't think I would have got one shot in on Vince. And it was just going to end up that they had a pull apart, or Vince held his own. And it would just look like kind of like a jostling kind of thing. And it'd be maybe me backing up and calling him a few names and a bunch of guys separating us. And that would have been all it was. And that's all Vince wanted. That's a happy way for him to have this all end up. That Vince stood his ground with Bret Hart, and stood up to me and let me know that he wasn't backing down, kind of thing. He wanted to look like the hero that day, and so I fooled Vince. I don't know what made me think about it, but as I grabbed his padded shoulder, I knew that if I tried to come overhand with a punch, that someone was going to hook my arm, and that would be the end of it. So I changed my mind at the last minute and decided that I would try an uppercut. And I came right between him. I thought, 14 years, you son of a bitch. And I came up between our arms, and I really did. I threw everything I had. I was pretty strong in those days. I had probably a 420 bench press and stuff like that. And I cocked Vince. A lot of people thought I punched Vince in the face. Never happened like that. I punched him in the jaw right here from underneath. And I think I lifted him honestly about 6 inches off the ground and popped him like a cork straight up in the air. And much to my amazement, Vince was out cold on the middle of the dressing room floor like a... I hit Vince with one punch, and he was out cold, and I was stunned, and also realized in a few seconds after that I broke my hand. Best break I ever had. I broke my hand right here on this baby bone here, this bone, and my hand was really sore, and Vince was out cold. And I remember Shane McMahon came over and propped up his dad on his ass. And like I say, behind Vince there was Sergeant Slaughter, Jerry Briscoe, Shane McMahon, and I can't remember, one or two other guys. He had about 5 guys behind him and himself. And I had 3 or 4 guys, but they weren't necessarily with me. But Undertaker's one of the only witnesses that is alive today that saw what really happened that day. So you can ask him. Anyway, I remember they sat Vince up on the dressing room floor and they started reviving him, and Vince was kind of going like. He did that for about a minute. I don't know if it was just annoying me or what, but I remember I stood up and I said, "Get him out of here." I remember kicking the camera crew out, and then I was kind of mad at myself. I thought, geez, that would have been great if I'd left those guys in here and they filmed that. Then they'd have the whole story. I was actually mad at those camera crew guys. I was about had enough of those guys on that day. I'll say that I've always been grateful that they captured what they did, though. They really did tell my side of the story in that documentary. But going back to Vince, they propped him up on his butt, and then they picked him up by his shoulders or his armpits of his coat and actually dragged him backwards and sat him on the bench across from me. And he was starting to sober up or wake up from being knocked out. And I remember I stood up and picked up my knee brace again. I said, "Get him the hell out of here before I..." And then Shane McMahon didn't believe me. So then I started to walk over with my knee brace over my head like this. Like I was going to beat him to death. And they were terrified and picked him up dragged him to the dressing room door, and that's where you see the camera come on when Vince comes out the door. And then as soon as Vince left, I thought about Shawn was in the dressing room. Now he's like all by himself without any backup. The only guy in there that maybe would save him was probably Undertaker. Everybody else wanted me to kill him, and he was bent over, ball in his hands. And I remember I thought I should just go over right now. I was about 4 feet over, and I started walking towards him, and I realized that my hand was throbbing pretty good from where I broke it. I thought I could really probably mess up my hand even more, punching Shawn's face in. I remember thinking I should just go for a 50-yard field goal right now. Just like he was bent over, and his head was just kind of right in the perfect spot, like if someone was holding a football, you know. And I thought about it, and I remember, I really did. I knew he was guilty, and I probably in some ways I should have just made that big boot. And I remember I tapped him on the arm, and the shoulder, and I said, "Thanks for the match." And he looked at me, and he just burst into tears and started crying. And I knew then he was guilty. And I sat back down, and it always makes me laugh because back in those days, Jim Neidhart, back in the early 90s when he was tagged up with Owen, he got into some trouble for something, and he got fired by Vince McMahon. And when he got fired, he went out and he took one of those little TV monitors, and Jim was third in the world in shot put back when he was a kid in college. But he picked up this TV monitor. It was a pretty good sized monitor, about the size of the chair you're sitting on, at least the square part of the chair. He picked this TV monitor up and hurled it like a shot put at one of the guys that ratted him out and got him fired. And it was always, that's how Jim got fired back in 1990, whatever it was, 90, 91. He got fired for throwing a TV monitor. And so as soon as Vince had left the dressing room and Shawn was crying and all that, I remember everyone we were all just looking at each other, and Jim Neidhart said to me, he goes, "So I guess they're not going to say anything to me anymore about breaking all those TV monitors back a few years, throwing that TV monitor." And it just made everybody in the dressing room, from Undertaker and Davey and Owen, the whole dressing room just cracked up laughing. We all started laughing really hard because we all knew that Jim got fired for throwing our monitors. And when in fact I had just smashed about 15 of them outside by the ringside, and it was just a good laugh. But in looking back on all that stuff, you know, I think you could see in the next year or the next 2 years, the next 5 years, that WWE, Vince, and Shawn Michaels, their story changed every year as to what happened. My story was the same story the day after it happened, and it's the same story today, and it's never changed. And now they get my side of the story, and it's sort of out there now. But I've always been you know, criticized in a lot of ways by fans for behaving the way I did that day, or I was the one wrestler that took things too serious, or I overreacted to my own stardom or my own success and that kind of thing. But I grew up with wrestling, and was my father and my whole family and everything they did to me that day. I think Vince got off lucky, you know, myself. And I would never change anything I ever did. I thought it was my crowning, you know, probably the single best thing I ever did in my whole life, punching Vince McMahon.